at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. You have more than 15 years experience working around climate change in international institutions, such as the World Bank. And you are coordinating the Climate Smart Agriculture team in the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment. In the next 8 minutes, can you try to give us a general overview from your perspective of where we find ourselves at the moment on these three key topics of climate, food security, and COVID-19? And can you tell us a little bit what you think is necessary to achieve more resilient and climate-friendly food systems? What needs to happen now and at the summit and later this year in all the UN processes? Federica, I'll let you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you, Raphael. Thank you to all the speakers and participants to be here for this invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here because I have the possibility to share some thought related to climate change and food security and the impact of climate change on food security. Climate change compromises our ability to ensure global food security, to eradicate poverty and achieve a sustainable development. Climate change has both direct and indirect effects on agricultural productivity, including changing rainfall patterns, drought, flooding, and the geographic redistribution of pests and diseases. In this way, climate change is reducing yields and nutrient content globally, increasing hunger. And the effect of climate change on the quantity and quality of the food that reaches our table can be multiple. Climate change can put the entire food sector at risk, not only in quantitative terms, but also in qualitative terms, such as the nutritional content and health of the food. Climate change causes a serious impact on all the phases of agri-food chain. The cultivated species and the cultivation areas, the harvesting periods, the times and methods of conservation, transport, the consumption of foodstuffs will change. It must also be considered that the increasing temperature and humidity are changing the geographical distribution and the damage caused by parasites and diseases. We need to act quickly to prepare the agri-food sector to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change. What is necessary? It is necessary to provide the actor of the sector with adequate knowledge, because responding in an appropriate manner will cause more and more negative conditions. All these impacts not only have a negative effect on the environment and biodiversity in agriculture, landscape, but will also lead to an excessive amount of harmful residues in food. And this can compromise food health and food safety. It is important to understand that many people around the world depend on agriculture for their livelihood. And in many countries, the agricultural sector contributes an important part of the GDP. So we need solutions that help farmers and all the systems to adapt to current and future climate risk. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions is another goal. At the same time, provide farmers with a decent income, so they can play their role in ensuring food security. The last two years we had, and we are again in this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, that is jeopardizing human health and disrupting the food system. So we need to also take in consideration that the measures to control virus outbreak are disrupting global food chains. And the food loss and waste is increasing as the farmers must resort to dumping perishables, and many people in urban centers are struggling to access fresh food. So it's clear that the situation is very difficult. And we all need to do more and work together to take climate change and to protect biodiversity and the environment. But at the same time, we need to work holistically by considering different aspects of development: economic, social, political, and technical aspects. We need more coherent policies, radical social change, innovative practices, and climate services. For these reasons, with the UN Secretary Guterres, convened the Food System Summit. The idea is to debate possible solutions and strategy to deliver progress on SDGs, and to identify also sustainable climate resilience. So the global response to climate change today will determine how we feed for future generations. How is contributing to reflection and tools on all these issues through approaches such as agroecology, climate smart agriculture that are climate friendly. We are obliged to think in a more holistic way. In terms of food systems, because the sustainability in agriculture goes beyond production and about how climate change, we need also to discuss how climate change, biodiversity, and the environment relate to each other. Our approach, such as I said, agroecology and CSA, aim to guide actions toward the ecological transition of agri-food systems to effectively support sustainable development and to ensure food security in a context of climate change. So I'm sure that this event will be fruitful to debate that will arise from this event, will give us the chance to learn more from each other, from new partnerships, and explore important challenges facing agri-food systems. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you so much, Federica. And indeed, like lots of challenges from decent income, as you mentioned, to like ensuring food security in a context of climate change. We'll get back to these topics in the Q&A. But now I would like to give Denise Tsai the opportunity to present I see like it's been the screen has been shared to present the activities of the Buddhist Tzu-Chi Foundation in Mozambique. Denise is leading Tzu-Chi's disaster relief mission in the region, and in this role she has organized more than 300 charitable events and goods distribution across 28 districts of Mozambique, mobilized local volunteers for recycling and community cleaning events, and work with local community and government leaders on various farming initiatives to improve disaster resilience. Denise, thank you for being with us. And can you tell us a little bit more about what you are concretely doing on the field in Mozambique?
Yeah, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Denise, and I'm a volunteer from Buddhist Tzu-Chi Foundation in Africa. As you can see, I'm a Chinese, but I am the daughter-in-law of Mozambique. Tzu-Chi Foundation was founded by Dharma Master Cheng Yen in 1966. Today, I would like to share as an interfaith organization what Tzu-Chi Foundation has been doing on the ground to tackle the problems of food insecurity. From 2019, different provinces of Mozambique has suffered from drought, cyclones, floods, pests, and along with COVID-19. We also face many challenges on different fronts. Until last year, 42.3% of children under 5 were students, which we witness in person day to day. Unfortunately, these factors all result in major agriculture loss, destruction of infrastructure, and the loss of livelihood, with over 750,000 internally displaced people. So yeah, you can see from this one. And in October, Tzu-Chi was there to support 2,500 families. In 2020, we can see this, okay. This one, okay. In 2020, the conflicts, drought, and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on economic activities were among the main drivers of food insecurity. With 2.8 million population, but over 80% people cannot afford an adequate diet. In response to this challenge, the government of Mozambique has recognized food and nutrition security as key priorities. In 2020, Tzu-Chi not only addressed immediate food need for 17,692 families, but also began thinking of how to build resilience into community. In 2021, among with the challenge of COVID, we experienced 2 cyclones in 3 weeks, both striking the central provinces. We supported 6,439 affected households who lost everything to the storms. We saw the importance and the potential of investing in the developing of local agriculture. As much of Mozambique is still dependent on importing food from South Africa, the pandemic lockdown resulted in several cuts to logistics and supply. So in 2020, we started an agriculture project with 2 hectares to developing resilience and local capacity to ensure that community can be self-sufficient in food supply. A story from 2019, we saw this child named Mario, who always came to this broken classroom every day. I asked why. He answered me, I miss my school. I want to study. I don't know when school can start. So I have to check here every day. At the same time, at the community boreholes, we saw many children have to carry the water because parents are waiting for their help to watering the plants and home use. We, Tzu-Chi there, asked the parents, can we assist you with seed and food and let the children go to school? This year, Tzu-Chi volunteer managed to inspire more community to join hands. With 1 family member, we can only carry 5 buckets of water. With almost 2,000 volunteers there, we can provide enough water for 19 hectares of farming. The concept is to source water together, ensure sustainable supply, and leave no one behind. We share with them how to manage, how we can work together as a community to create food security for the vulnerable. During the pandemic times, our volunteers self-organized to work on the farms in shift, as you can see the paper here. And we are investing in youth education to give scholarships so they can go back to school to learn English, how to use internet, improve computer skills for resource development by themselves. So here I share this sheet. The youth managed to create this template and showing the size and the name of the farm, which crops planted, with which quantity of the seed. For example, the first line you can see 200 gram pumpkin seed planted in 20 of March 2021, and the estimate date of harvest is 26th of June 2021, and germinated 90%, and the resulting in harvest of 80%. It also shows how many community volunteers contributed their time in this farm and who is the owner of the farm. Problem they faced, such a flood or pest, also are noted to be addresses. The part which impressed me the most is the youth understand the majority of the communities cannot read and write. So they post the picture of the crops to help them to see we are managing with transparency, ensuring all are satisfied without any suspicion amongst the group, bringing peace and harmony amongst the community. This next sheet, you can see on which date, in which community we deliver what quantity of each vegetable to how many vulnerable families, and how many volunteers are working on that day. Every day after the farming hours, we all sit down and conduct a sharing with the youth, sharing knowledge, encouraging moral and ethical principles by study or singing and theater, which is the local way. From 2020, together in Yamatanda district, Mitushira area, we met the biggest vegetable farms during the dry season. And through education, we all learn to become sustainable and supported communities. And through education, we want to give them a concept, not just giving materials, seed and buckets, but also to build their own food system. The importance of community and the togetherness plus our interconnectedness make use of the land we have, not depend on transportation, not depends on others. Learning also how to preserve food to build resilience, reaching out to other nearby village and invite them to join this initiative. Resilience is our shared interdependence, and that we are all connected in this struggle together, and only by empowering each other to have access to healthy, nutritious, climate resilience, plant-based food, can we ensure that our future is grounded in well-being, hope, and prosperity. So here you can see we teach them to preserve the food by drying and grill the maize. And because of we join the hands, these are the numbers and the vegetables we have been helping in the communities, the family numbers. And as my 11 years old child, Stacy, told me, alone we go faster, together we go further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Denise, and congratulations on your great work. It's really beautiful to see these concrete examples of like the vegetable farms or the fruit crops. Really congratulations. We'll get back to you, I think, with more questions later, but now we have our last speaker today, who's Loretta Heber-Girardet. Loretta serves as the Chief of the Risk Knowledge Monitoring and Capacity Development Branch at UNDRR, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Holding a breadth of expertise in disaster and risk management in humanitarian and conflict setting, Loretta is also serving as Action Track 5.1.3 co-chair, bringing together game-changing solutions that address systemic approaches to crisis and risk management within our food system. Loretta, thank you so much for taking the time and being with us today. And can you tell us a little bit more in the next 8-10 minutes, what about the role that food plays in building resilience and reduce risk in disaster? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start off by really congratulating our last speaker, the example from Mozambique. I first encountered the Tzu-Chi Foundation in Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and already they were doing quite innovative work on cash-based assistance. So it was really great to hear that the type of work that you're doing around food systems security. Really appreciated that presentation. It's very much a pleasure to be part of today's pre-summit affiliated event. And what I'd like to do is share some thoughts on how better management of disaster and climate risk is, I believe, at the core of achieving food systems transformation towards 2030. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic really has been a stark reminder that hazardous events are not confined to one sector, one location, or one community, and they can rapidly transform into cross-border disasters with global and long-lasting effects on social, ecological, and economic systems. And what we're seeing today is a world in which we are faced with unprecedented uncertainty, complexity, volatility. And this is against this backdrop that food systems really must be transformed to be more agile so that they can become resilient. And it is my hope that the Food Systems Summit really will provide this opportunity to advance the way that we perceive, manage, and prevent disaster and climate risk in our food systems. Now, just starting with disaster risk reduction, we know that it is extremely important to protect development investments in agriculture, livestock, fisheries, agriculture, forestry sectors. And that I believe far greater attention and investment in implementing the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which is the global blueprint on reducing disaster risk, is critically important. But we're not on track to achieve the Sendai framework, just like we're not on track to achieve the Paris Agreement or the SDGs. And the need is urgent. In recent years, the number of recorded disasters and their impact on livelihoods and economies has risen dramatically. Agriculture is particularly affected, absorbing a disproportionate share of the impact of disasters. 23% of all damage and loss caused by medium to large scale disasters in developing and low to mid-income countries, it's in the agriculture sector. And this rises to 26% for climate-related disasters and up to more than 80% for drought alone. And the most recent data that we collect in terms of monitoring implementation of the Sendai framework tells us that in 2019 alone, 67% of all direct economic losses from disasters was in the agriculture sector. So this is the equivalent of around $6.5 billion across crops, livestock, fisheries, agriculture, and forestry. So to make food systems more resilient, we need to invest more in prevention. We need to break the cycle of preparing for a crisis, responding to it, and then doing our best to build back better. These are all critical steps, but where we're really seeing a lack of investment and attention is the investment in prevention. And far more needs to be done to prevent the impact of disaster events, whether from climate or non-climate events, from negatively impacting food systems. So I'd like to share maybe just a few suggestions on what we need to do now to improve the way that we manage risk to food systems. And first of all, we need to do a far better job of understanding the risks that surround us. And I think it doesn't come as a surprise to any of you that few countries really understood or had acted on the information that a pandemic could have such devastating impacts on their countries. The risk landscape is changing rapidly, and yet we still tend to consider risk in isolation. Yet COVID-19 has taught us that hazards do not come one by one sequentially. As the world has been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, there has also been a desert locust plague in the Horn of Africa, hurricanes in Central America, major civil wars, and most recently, disastrous floodings in Northern Europe. So we need to do a better job of understanding that disaster risk is multifaceted, it's interconnected, and it cascades along the entire food system chain. The impacts are multi-pronged. We need to go beyond siloed approaches. And it's not just looking at hazards. We need to do a far better job of understanding vulnerability and the exposure of people to the hazards. For example, rapid urbanization is rapidly also increasing exposure. As more people move to cities, they're more exposed to disaster events. And this, of course, has a knock-on impact in terms of their vulnerability. So my first call is really for us to invest more in understanding risk and understanding it in a holistic manner. This provides the foundation towards innovative and integrated multi-hazard and multi-sector disaster risk management strategies. Secondly, I think we must acknowledge that climate and disaster risk and food systems are in a reciprocal relationship. They're intimately linked. Climate change is driving up disaster risks across the world. We've heard it already today. Currently, 80 to 90% of all disasters fueled by natural hazards are climate related, and it's changing the intensity and the frequency of disaster events. We see it in many different countries where the disaster cycles that they're used to are changing and they're becoming quite unpredictable. At the same time, we also know that climate change is decreasing the resilience of many poor households and community due to factors such as decreasing agricultural productivity, increasing disease factors, and shortages of water and energy, for example. So the trends indicate that less predictable, more extreme climate events are becoming the norm. And at the global level, climate change will increase the risk of food and nutrition insecurity to unprecedented levels. And this, of course, undermines our current efforts to eradicate hunger and undernutrition. At the same time, unsustainable food systems are contributing to climate change by causing soil degradation or deforestation. And right now, food production is responsible for up to 29% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So I see stepping up the ambition around climate action, in particular, here at the next COP26, the ambition on climate change adaptation as absolutely critical for building food systems resilience. But at the same time, we cannot look at climate change in isolation of other non-climate disaster events. The dynamic of climate change, epidemics or pandemics, economic shocks, other types of protracted crises, they must be considered and managed simultaneously because they are interconnected. And this takes me to my third point. We need to really improve risk governance and scale up complementary planning processes on disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, but also agriculture in an integrated manner. Specifically, we need to see better integration of climate change projections into risk management planning. We need to ensure that national adaptation plans are built on solid risk assessments that look at climate and non-climate risks in an integrated manner. And we need to ensure that the national disaster risk management strategies incorporate an agriculture sector perspective. And what is extremely important is to see disaster risk reduction better mainstreamed into agriculture sector development plans, as well as producing specific DRR plans for the agriculture sector. And we feel that integrating DRR into agriculture development plans really offer a good opportunity to address the root causes of vulnerability and exposure to multiple types of hazard risks. But for such integrated approaches to work, we need to break down the institutional silos and embrace what we call comprehensive disaster and climate risk management, planning and governance. And we have seen with the COVID crisis how in many countries, governments have put in place multi-sector management systems that really show a high level of political leadership, bringing together the health sector with disaster management agencies and others impacted sectors. And we think something similar is needed for all types of disasters, including those most likely to impact food systems. And my final point is that building food systems resilience is also about identifying those who are most at risk, those who are most vulnerable, and making sure that they have a voice in the development and the implementation of national and local DRR, climate change, and agriculture planning and processes. And we have seen, and the good news, I'd like to end with good news, is that the COVID-19 crisis really has sparked an interest in doing more on prevention. I think the world has realized that we can no longer sit back and wait for such catastrophic disasters to impact us, that we need to be proactive, we need to invest in risk reduction and prevention. And my hope is that the Food Systems Summit will be another step towards raising the ambition on disaster and climate risk prevention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Loretta. It's really very interesting to hear from your perspective. So invest more in prevention, understanding vulnerability, and of course, the breakdown of institutional silos. I think it's very interesting. I will now open the Q&A with my colleague, Juliette Tronchon, who's been collecting some of the questions on the chat and on by email. And we'll try to stick for 2 or 3 minutes maximum answers so we can answer a few of them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Raphael. My name is Juliette Tronchon. I'm also working with Raphael on UN advocacy at ProVeg International. And yeah, we received some questions per email. So I would like to ask you, Denise, first about your work in Mozambique. You already have done an impressive work in Mozambique. Can you tell us a bit more about future projects and what you hope to achieve there?
Okay, thank you very much. Right now, this year, what we are doing is we are still continue teach them how to preserve the food. Is quite important. And for future, it's very important is in order to scale up our work and ensure the longevity in our farms, we need support from partners to bring more agriculture knowledge and the technique to prevent losses against nature disasters, climate change, and pest, while also working to find organic methods to plant seeds and utilize innovations to increase yield and help more people. And we are not looking for the big enterprise sponsors to deliver industrial farming and practice that depletes the soil and over productivities. And we want to empower the local small farmers more, join hands together, giving them more resources to stay resilient to the future crisis we face. And join hands together, even more people can gain access to healthy, nutritious, plant-rich food. And so this is what we are really have to make the bigger scale for our future. And because we feel like I love this land, which is Africa, I call home. The land is unpolluted and the nature. And I hope that we can use the land in a way that will be sustainable and pure. And I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. That's very inspiring. My next question is for Federica. After all the discussion we had today, what do you think would be the best outcome of this summit regarding our topics? And what can we expect from COP26?
Thank you very much for this question. What we expect from COP26 is to discuss, to found after a discussion, what are the political strategies, the better political strategies to work on agriculture in the context of climate change. I think for many years, the agriculture was completely out from the discussion of climate change issues and impact. And after many years, the FAO and other organizations raised this point, how agriculture has a big impact on climate change because it's one of the contributors for climate change. But at the same time, how working with specific practices, with specific technologies, we can help them to fight against climate change. So we hope that agriculture can be more and more inside this discussion, and how the countries, the governments would like to raise and create policies that can have impact against climate change in agriculture. The first part of your question maybe is not, Can you?
It's about the summit. What would be the best outcome from this summit? What do you think?
The big summit is another point where we can raise this point, because we need to discuss and to find solutions, but concrete solutions, not just continuing working and speaking about these topics. We need to find concrete solutions to elaborate an holistic strategies, holistic systems that can take in consideration not only technologies or practices, but also policies, framework strategies, how we can involve people in this context, in this debate, and in concrete solutions, because we need to take in consideration that people, indigenous peoples, women, youth, are at the base of our work, at the base of food systems, because they produce food and they are also consumers of food. So we need to work with them, and without them, we cannot have a good solution.
Thank you, Federica. And yes, you're right. We need more action and less talks and meeting. I think we did enough. We had that yesterday at the opening session. So now, Loretta, we would have two questions for you. And first, can you tell us a bit more about the Sendai framework? And after that, how to build forward after the COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Yes, about the Sendai framework. The Sendai framework is a global agreement that was drafted in 2015. Is part of the 2030 agenda, along with the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and these are often looked at together. What it aims to do is to avert the creation of new disaster risks and to mitigate and to reduce existing risks. And essentially, for a long time, the way that disasters were managed was that we waited for a disaster to occur. We tended to prepare for the disaster, to be ready to respond to it. But there has been a shift in thinking. And the shift in thinking is really that far more can be done to ensure that the impacts of disasters are prevented. This can range from, for example, the way that we design buildings, infrastructure resilience, to planting mangroves, for example, to ensure that, that the impact of typhoons is lessened. Or it can range also to where people live. If they live in hazard-prone areas such as floodbanks, to develop solutions for that. So it's really about being ahead of the curve and understanding the types of disaster risks that we face and putting in place the appropriate measures to lessen the impact. And we have seen this very successful in many different countries. I think the most often cited case is Bangladesh, where we had a cyclone that killed hundreds of thousands of people. And then a few years later, after risk reduction measures had been put in place, the terms of mortality was really much less. So unfortunately, though, prevention costs money, and people have seen a lack of, I would say, political leadership and investment in prevention. And so we're caught in a cycle of responding to disasters. So the Sendai framework is a framework that allows us to really look at how we can reduce mortality associated with disasters, the number of affected people, but also economic losses. And one thing that I would like to say in relation to food systems is that where we're really seeing an increase in disaster events due to climate change is what we call high frequency, low impact disasters. So very localized disasters, which don't necessarily make headlines, but have a tremendous impact on the livelihoods, especially of farmers. And so a lot more work is needed to really scale up efforts to achieve the Sendai framework. The question about Build Back Better is core to the Sendai framework. It's all about how do you put in place appropriate measures after disaster to ensure that impacts such as the ones that we have encountered with COVID are never felt again. And I think that, again, as I've mentioned before, COVID has been a wake-up call. It's been a wake-up call because it's had a global impact, and there hasn't been one country that hasn't been impacted by COVID, not one community. So I'm hopeful that this need to be much more conscious of climate change, of climate-related disasters, but other types of disasters, such as pandemics, really will start to be acted upon. There's a lot of discussion around a green recovery with COVID, and really trying to make sure that we're taking into account the environmental impact of our actions. And the UN is supporting this very heavily. But of course, this all requires political leadership and courage. And so maybe going back to the question about the COP26, I think this will really be a very important indicator to all of us, whether the level of ambition that we need to see at COP26 to reduce carbon emissions, but also to scale up adaptation is going to be there or not. So I think it's a very pivotal summit alongside the Food System Summit. And we should do everything we can to advocate for very
Thank you so much, Loretta, and thank you, Juliette, for taking the questions. I would now like to offer you all the opportunity just to maybe wrap up like one maybe key message you would like people to take from this meeting, what we should achieve in this Food System Summit, what we should achieve this year, because we also, as mentioned, have like COPs, like not only the COP26, but also like different like, you know, UN forums where we have the opportunity to advocate for change. So maybe if you have one key message to the audience today, it would be the good time to now. Maybe Denise, we would go first with Denise. You are still muted, Denise. We cannot hear you. Denise, you are still muted. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, the technical problem here. Yeah, thank you for today's opportunity. And still, I still want to say that whatever challenge we face, and I still believe there are solutions there. And then we can play, we as a different organization, we can play the different roles. So together we can go further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise. I would now like Federica, if you have like a final thought or message you would like to say from FAO perspective.
Yeah, well, from FAO perspective, we can say that what is needed is a global view of the entire policy framework, including input and other supports for how they help the transition to the sustainable future. Of course, this is not an easy task. Changes must therefore be made by actors through the food chain, farmers, processors, distributors, transporters, and of course consumers. But appropriate policies will be needed to provide the incentive to all these actors to build the resilience of farmers and food systems to climate change and make, of course, a sustainable contribution to climate change mitigation.
Thank you so much, Federica. And indeed, resilience is a word we heard a lot today. I think it's very, very key. Loretta, if you have a final thought to share with us.
Well, thank you. And I don't think it'll come as a surprise to anyone. We need to invest in prevention. And I know that we know what to do. We know what works. And yet somehow we are lacking still that political will. We're lacking the resources needed to put in place the measures that's going to reduce the impact of especially climate-related disasters on the most vulnerable populations, on farmers in high-risk countries. And so my call would really be to think about when we're planning our food systems resilience efforts to put in place a comprehensive risk management approach as core to this at the national level, but also in all the global advocacy work that we're carrying out. I think it's critical. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Loretta, and thank you for being with us at such an early time. We have arrived at the end of this session, so the Buddhist Tzu-Chi Foundation and ProVeg International would like to thank really our three speakers. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us Very much appreciated. We will have another session tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. CEST Rome time on diet change or climate change, unlocking the potential of plant-based innovation. So a lot about like food innovation, and we would love to see you there. Feel free to give us feedback on the email address on the YouTube chat, or to simply reach